hundredweight of explosives was dropped by Ukrainian intelligence fighters on Russian drone operators. The scouts discovered the headquarters of the Russian occupiers from the so-called Rubicon center in Avdiivka, Donetsk region. And with precision, even in the dense urban environment, they directed drones loaded with explosives. According to the main intelligence directorate, Rubicon is one of the most combat-capable structures of the Russian occupation army, on which Russia spends significant resources.
As a result of the strike, the officers and drone operators of the Russian Rubicon who were in the headquarters were eliminated. The main intelligence directorate of Ukraine reminds everyone that for every war crime committed against the Ukrainian people, there will be just retribution.
Since the beginning of the day, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has counted 103 clashes along the entire front line. On the Sloviansk section of the front, the defense forces repelled 12 enemy attacks. Another 9 times, the Russians tried to storm positions on the Oleksandrivka section of the front. And in the Kostyantynivka direction, the Ukrainian armed forces stopped 7 more attempts by the Russian army to break through Ukrainian defenses. Almost a quarter of all battles since the beginning of the day have taken place in the Pokrovsk direction. The Russians stormed Ukrainian positions 27 times in the areas of 15 settlements.
According to various preliminary estimates, there are about 100,000 Russian occupation troops around the city of Pokrovsk. All of this that's happening right now is an attempt to buy a little more time, because the pressure is really intense, and for 13 months straight, as we've discussed, the city's defenders have been doing things that are simply unimaginable in terms of defense. Because by all standards, by all the plans of the Russian Federation, the city was supposed to have been captured back in September or October of 2024.
In the southern Slobozansky direction, the Ukrainian armed forces have repelled 7 enemy attacks since the beginning of the day. In particular, the Russian army continues its attempts to break through from the north into the city of Vovchansk in the Kharkiv region. But analysts say these assaults are just a diversionary maneuver.
Putin's main goal is the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. As of today, at this moment, unless he has completely lost his mind. That's it. Everything else is just to distract attention and give us a chance somewhere to regroup, to reinforce, for example, the prosecutor's direction. But I also want to reassure you that we have enough forces and resources to eliminate and capture them, so that we have something to exchange for our prisoners, both military and civilians, who are currently in Russian prison.
The Russians continue to advance in the Chasiv Yar area with small assault groups using motorcycles, aviation, and artillery. This was reported by the 24th Separate Mechanized Brigade named after King Danilo. In just the past week, the Russian army has lost nearly 100 soldiers in this area alone. A total of 294 drones of various types were destroyed, along with an electronic warfare system, a ground-based robotic complex, and 3 communication antennas.
Another 900 Russian occupiers were eliminated on the front lines over the past day by Ukraine's defense forces. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, whose data you can now see on your screens, the total combat losses since the start of the full-scale war have already exceeded 1,146,000 soldiers. In addition, yesterday 3 Russian tanks, 3 armored combat vehicles, 24 artillery systems, and 70 units of automotive equipment were destroyed.
We will discuss the situation at the front with our guest. Vladislav Seleznev, military expert, is joining us. Hello, Vladislav.
Welcome. Glory to Ukraine.
Good morning, colleagues. Glory to the heroes.
What can be added regarding Pokrovsk at this very moment, if I may say so, because we understand that the situation is developing dynamically. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, absolutely, colleagues. The range of emotions in Ukrainian society is quite striking, ranging from everything is lost to rather illusory expectations. We need to understand that, as usual, the truth lies somewhere in the middle and is determined by the following factors. The situation on the battlefield is extremely difficult, which is due to the fact that the enemy has concentrated a huge amount of manpower in this sector of the front, and they are basically not sparing it. As part of their attempts to infiltrate the territory of Pokrovsk, the enemy is ready to send in wave after wave of new Russian assault troops. Their goal is for at least a small portion of them to make it into the center of the settlement and establish themselves somewhere in local basements or in the ruins of multi-story buildings. The enemy is partially succeeding with this plan, According to various estimates, there are currently between 200 and 300 Russian assault troops on the territory of Pokrovsk. But all the forces and resources of the Ukrainian defense, involved in the defense of both Pokrovsk and Myrnherad, are now effectively targeting them. But what really poses an extremely serious problem for our servicemen are the enemy's attempts to close the pincers of an operational semi-encirclement. It's enough to open the deep state map to see that the enemy continues to apply pressure, both from the northeastern outskirts of Pokrovsk and, accordingly, from the northwestern outskirts of Pokrovsk. The distance between the edges of these pincers, according to various estimates, ranges from 3 to 7 kilometers. And without a doubt, under these conditions, it's extremely difficult to talk about stable and safe logistics for our servicemen who are in Pokrovsk-Myrnherad. Nevertheless, it's not for nothing that the Ukrainian Defense Forces, and primarily representatives of the main intelligence directorate, are carrying out tactical actions aimed at eliminating Russian militants who have infiltrated deep into our defenses. I think that in the coming week, we will clearly see the trends. How successful are countermeasures are in stabilizing the situation on the battlefield, and essentially what all of this will lead to. Yes, of course, the very fact that not only the Commander-in-Chief, General Sursky, but also the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky, are present at this section of the front gives hope to some extent. This means that this section of the front is under special supervision by the highest military and political leadership of our country. I hope that we will be able to stabilize the situation on this part of the front, although, of course, the enemy is currently making a tremendous effort to radically change the situation on this section of the front in their favor. Why? It's obvious that if the enemy manages to take control of both Pokrovsk and Myrnherad, they will then focus their efforts on attacking Konstantinivka. And Konstantinivka is part of the largest urban agglomeration in the Donetsk region that remains under the control of the Ukrainian army, which includes not only Konstantinivka and Droshkovka, but also Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. Therefore, without a doubt, right now we are watching how the situation develops, which, in the near future, will definitely have an impact on the situation in this region at the operational tactical level.
Tell me, what is happening around Kupyansk right now, considering the positions and statements made by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky regarding, let's say, the clearing of this settlement from those representatives of the occupying Russian Federation army who managed to infiltrate the city itself?
Colleagues, at this point, I suggest our audience pay attention to the following fact. Just a few weeks ago, the group conducting defensive battles in the area of Kupyansk and Kupyansk-Uzlovia was put under the command of General Mikhail Dropedyak. He's not called a military crisis manager for nothing. He knows how to handle extremely complex issues by their very nature. I believe it is precisely General Dropedyak's ability to organize defensive operations in this way, thank you, and gives that very hope that President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky voiced regarding stabilizing the situation on this section of the front. But it's not just the generalship and expertise that set General Dropedyak's section of the front apart. Our defense forces are now acting very pragmatically on this part of the front, not only using their resources to eliminate those who have infiltrated the Kupyansk area, Russian assault troops, but also carrying out operations to destroy pontoon crossings over the Oska River, north of Kupyansk. They are conducting operations to destroy key logistical routes that run not only along the eastern, but also the western bank of this river. And in general, I believe that this activity is gradually yielding results. Regarding the Kupyansk area, I have a more optimistic outlook, because that's striking. That striking change in the situation, the conditions on this section of the front, which I have observed over the past 2 or 3 weeks, gives reason to hope that we will be able to stabilize the situation in this area. All Russian assault troops infiltrated into the settlement will be found, and if they refuse to surrender, they will be destroyed. And that means the enemy's chances of achieving the results they were counting on are very, very slim. Basically, this is the logic behind the enemy's actions. On this section of the front, it's obvious that it's extremely important for them to take control of the largest logistical railway hub in this region of our country. And in fact, for this very goal, they are ready to use all the forces and resources they have at their disposal. They have the desire, but things aren't going as smoothly as they'd like.
Well, also, taking all circumstances into account, nevertheless, Russia is once again postponing its plans for an offensive in the Donbas, and every loss suffered by the Russian army is a contribution to our strength. Ukrainian defense. This was stated by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, during a conversation with Ukrainian military personnel. He emphasized that drones are now the top priority. Most of the resources are being directed specifically toward drones. After all, they help Ukraine's defense forces hold the front and disrupt the Russians' plans. Let's listen.
It's not the first time the Russian army has been forced to postpone the deadlines they set for themselves regarding our Pokrovsk, regarding our Dobropilya. And every Russian loss specifically in these directions in Donetsk region, on the border with our Dnipropetrovsk region, as well as in Kupyansk, every Russian loss is a contribution to our ability to defend the state, to protect our people, our independence.
Vladislav, what does it mean for the Russian army to once again postpone plans to capture this or that territory, considering that the Pokrovsk situation has been dragging on for a very long time, not just for a year? How do you think this affects the Russian army itself, and in general, from a political perspective in the Kremlin, what do they think about it? To what extent is this a blow to their, let's say, pride as well?
Are we scratching the ego of Vladimir Putin and his inner circle? To a certain extent, yes. But will this stop Putin and his circle from pursuing further aggressive plans against Ukraine? I don't think so. Remember, Vladimir Putin often repeats the phrase that the Russian Federation always plays the long game. And in fact, we are witnessing these transformations right here and now. Remember, Kiev in 3 days, the entire territory of Ukraine will be occupied in 3 weeks. That was the statement made by key Russian officials and propagandists back in February 2022. It's been more than 3.5 years since then. The fighting continues, and the number of Russian losses keeps rising. And the results are quite dismal, especially for the Russian army. For the summer campaign of 2025, the enemy was definitely counting on completely blocking our group of troops operating in the Sloviansk and Kramatorsk area. But as we can see, they still haven't really established those 3 main bridgeheads from which they were supposed to launch attacks on the settlements I mentioned. And that means that the plans of Putin's army keep getting pushed back, and I wouldn't risk saying that the enemy will be able to carry out this plan in any foreseeable future. For a completely obvious reason. The resilience of the Ukrainian army, multiplied by the support not only of the Ukrainian people, but also of our European and overseas friends and partners. Even though the world today is quite rational, cynical, and pragmatic, nevertheless, the unification of our efforts, ours and those of our partners, allows me to look to the future with fairly confident hope. After all, the key factor that determines the situation on the battlefield and decides the winner is the factor of resources. At present, we continue to receive everything necessary for our defenders on the battlefield. Not only from the Ukrainian defense industry, but also from our European and overseas partners, which is certainly encouraging.
Now, let's talk about another area where the confrontation and resistance to this aggression by the Russian Federation continues. In small groups of several people, the Russian army continues its assaults in the area of responsibility of the Ukrainian Defense Forces group in Kursk. As reported by the spokesperson of the formation, Oleksandr Nezvesny, on the Yereninovny telethon, the intensity of Russian attacks has decreased. According to his information, mercenaries from North Korea are not crossing the Ukrainian border and are staying in the second echelon. Meanwhile, Ukrainian defenders are holding certain positions in the Kursk region of the Russian Federation. Vladislav, what does your analysis show? Yes, and taking into account, let's say, the involvement of the Russian Federation's army, manpower from, essentially, an ally, North Korea.
But this episode, in principle, confirms the logic of my reasoning that the key factor influencing the situation, the balance of power, is the resource factor. In this case, we're talking about manpower resources, which the enemy literally pulled from the territory of the Kursk region, as well as from northern Kharkiv and part of the Sumy region just a few weeks ago, redeploying them to directions that are more of a priority for them, Pokrovsk and Mernherat. It's obvious that the logic behind the actions of the Russian army in this regard is absolutely clear. It's the so-called Trishkin-Kaftan situation, where resources are needed everywhere and in large quantities, but physically, they just aren't there. That's why, even in the Kursk region of the Russian Federation, North Korean army representatives are now playing the role of assault troops. Because all the Russian assault troops are currently engaged on other sections of the front, and many of them have long since become one with Ukrainian soil forever, remaining there. So it's obvious that, in the near future, these directions are unlikely to become priorities for the Russian General Staff. The fighting taking place in our Sumy region, and partly in the border area of Chernihiv region, yes, of course, the enemy will try to carry out some sabotage and reconnaissance raids. But it's not appropriate to talk about a large-scale escalation of hostilities in this context. The same goes for the situation in the Kursk region, where several square kilometers are still under the control of the Ukrainian army. And notice how the rhetoric of top officials and top propagandists of the Russian Federation has changed. They are trying not to pay any attention to the fact that part of the territory, sovereign territory of the Russian Federation, is under the control of a foreign army. So in this context, the presence of North Korean military personnel is kind of a magic wand for the Russian General Staff, because they, in secondary directions, have the ability to carry out tasks to hold back the advance of Ukrainian defense forces. As for the priorities of the Russian army, I still believe that the key directions, which in the near future will remain in our news agenda, are not only Pokrovsk, Mirny, Ukraina, but also the fighting in the Kupyansk direction, the fighting in the Lyman direction, and of course, we should not exclude from the list of rather dangerous areas, in terms of intensification of hostilities, the south of the Zaporizhia region. At the very least, the trends regarding the intensification of hostilities on this section of the front are quite telling.
Thank you, Vladislav, for taking the time to join us this morning. Let me remind our viewers, Vladislav Seleznev, military expert, was with us on the line.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.